This is a video response to Michael Vrazatoulis, my friend from Greece, who put up a video entitled Christ the Luciferian, Adversarian Musings. And on Facebook he mentioned my name and it said, "This ended up being an ontological / spiritual semi-defense of Christianity. Darrell Sloan, I know you'll have much to say." Well, I put it on my MP3 player and I had to listen to it while I was out walking, and I ended up listening to it twice through actually. Very interesting. I will link the video down below so that other people can go watch it first. What I'm about to say here may not make all that much sense unless you watch his video. But yeah, I kind of know where you're coming from. I wondered where your video was going when you were saying that Christ and Satan have this thing in common. We're talking mythologically here, folks. Okay. And I know that goes right over some people's heads. But anyway, they have this thing in common, and I didn't really know where you were going with the video until you said the enemy of Christ and Satan is Buddha. And suddenly I got it. I know that you have noticed something that I said once before about my personal philosophy, which is that it can be summarized with the idea that it's kind of like what you get if Buddha and Satan got together and worked out their differences. It's kind of like Buddha versus Satan. And I still think of my own personal philosophy that way. But I suppose, before we end up talking over everybody's heads here completely, I need to put a little bit of meat on that skeleton to get people understanding what I'm talking about. First of all, your idea that there's a similarity between Christ and Satan in self-deification, that they're both interested in self-deification, and by Christ and Satan I really mean Christianity and Satanism. And you're right. But I'd never really phrased it in those terms before, because both are about the supremacy of the ego. Christianity believes there's a me sitting in there and that me must exist forever. Satanism doesn't question that presupposition. It also believes that there's a me here. It's just a bit more realistic about the notion of there not being any life after death. But both religions, both ideologies are centered around the idea of getting one up on the universe. Self and universe are separate, and you have to strive to remain, strive to stay. And Christianity says, I'm going to stay forever. I'm going to live forever. And really, when you think about it, self-deification is a word that fits. To wish to live forever, is that not really the same thing as wishing to be God? Or a god? Think of the gods of Mount Olympus. It's kind of like that, isn't it? There was a universe before me, but now that I'm here, I'm going to stay forever and ever and ever, and I will never cease. This entity sitting in here will never stop. And when this flesh dissolves, the entity goes on somewhere else. never stopping. That's Christianity. And so I see the same kind of pattern in Satanism, where it's about striving to make the best of this life because you don't have another. Anton LaVey even mentioned the idea of living on after death through your accomplishments in life, whereas it's not the ego living on, it's what you left behind. Anton LaVey lives on through his writings, for instance, in a sense, in a manner of speaking. But Buddhism is very, very different from both of those, because it is all about redefining what we mean by ego. I hope people understand that I'm not using the word ego in the sense of egotistical. The ego, I'm just using the word ego in the more sophisticated sense of individual self-consciousness. The idea that you are a thing surrounded by a universe that is not you. Ego and mind are essentially synonymous. But Buddhism says that the ego is an illusion. Is that true? It is true. It can be demonstrated in a number of ways, intellectually or experientially. It came to me very easily about 8 years ago. And by the way, when I say Buddhism, what I really mean is what in the West is generally called non-duality. It can go by certain other names, but non-duality and Buddhism pretty much goes hand in hand. But Buddhism, especially Zen, which is the form of Buddhism that I know the most about, and I'm not an expert in it, but there are other forms of Buddhism just like there are other forms of Christianity. But Zen has a particular interest in meditation, and the word Zen just means meditation. So here's how it goes. Now, I'm not talking from experience here, but here's how it seems to go. You start off meditating, thinking that you're going to have some kind of enlightenment experience, thinking that it's going to achieve something very special. And in a roundabout way, it can. But all you do is you sit there without any other form of stimulation, looking at a wall or with your eyes closed, and your legs are crossed in that lotus position, and your hands are making this sort of a pattern just around the navel. And all of that is just designed not for any spiritual reason, just to get you into a sort of every part of your body is occupied in a way that is focused in a particular way. That means you don't have to move. I mean, if I wanted to meditate and I decided I was just going to sit like this, well, before you know it, you're going to be moving about. You know, or if I was just going to slouch around like out there, before you know it, you're moving again. But if you get into the Zazen posture of Zen Buddhism, you'll find that is quite conducive to sitting still for longer periods of time. You're not so comfortable that you would fall asleep, but you're not uncomfortable either. And if you are uncomfortable when you're doing it, probably means you're not really doing it right. And I know some people have problems with their legs. I can't really do the full lotus comfortably, but I can do the half lotus. And your bum should be propped up on a cushion so that your knees are towards the floor. Anyway, the idea is that you sit there with nothing to stimulate you, and you simply observe your thoughts as they arise. And what you come to realize very quickly, or maybe not so quickly, is that your mind is this raging cacophony of thoughts that try to take you away and steal your attention away so that you're carried along by them. And you have to keep pulling yourself back towards being an observer of those thoughts. So, you do this and you do this and you start to feel, I'm really crap at meditation. But that was the whole point. The whole point was to reveal that to you. And what it's really doing is it allows you to create a sense of separation between consciousness observing the mind. Consciousness observing the activity of the mind. So instead of simply being carried along by every thought and self-identifying with those thoughts, this thought is me, you see yourself as a separate observer of the thoughts. And then comes the question, if I am not my thoughts, who am I? And that's what opens up something very interesting. You know, if you're not your mind, your ego, who are you? You're everything. You're the cosmos. You're God, whatever you want to call it. Everything is focused into separate things, separate minds, seemingly separate minds. That's a bit of a leap, I know. You can also tackle this in a more scientific fashion by simply, understanding that if you whack someone over the head, or if I get whacked over the head by someone, the thing that I call the self vanishes. I don't disappear into a black room where I'm tapping on the inside of my skull trying to wake the body up again. The thing that I call the self is simply not there. The conditions have returned to the conditions that were present before I was born, where there was no me. So it stands to reason that if I am knocked out and there is no me, if someone then slits my throat while I'm knocked out, there will continue to be no me. You see? And yet, if that doesn't happen, and if I am allowed to recover, this thing called me suddenly manifests again. So it's very clear that this thing that the Christian wants to make live forever isn't even a real thing, because it can be switched on and off at will. So what is it? It's just a lens. It's just a focusing plate for the universe to experience separation. That's the only kind of framework that makes sense. And that is essentially compatible with the Buddhist framework. Now, here's where the whole Satan versus Buddha thing comes in. Is it really a kind of a tag team thing? Christ and Satan versus Buddha? The way you kind of described it. I can imagine Satan and Christ on one side of the ring, and Buddha on the other. But Christ is looking very beat up, and Satan's looking a little bit beat up, and Buddha is also looking a bit beat up. But Christ, he's looking a bit worse for the wear. Because frankly, Satanism makes mincemeat out of Christianity. Satanism, not just Anton LaVey, but other writers on the left-hand path, are generally quite good at exposing the wrong premises on which Christianity is based. The premise that man is something special, man is not just an animal. This is clearly not true. Man is an animal. Man is a mammal. And Christianity rests on the idea that because man is not an animal, he is this special thing made in the image of God, fallen from grace, and therefore in need of something outside of himself in order to complete himself. And so we have the redemption story. Satanism simply accepts that man is what he is, just like all the animals are what they are, and joy and suffering are all part of the package. Suffering, sin, all these other things. These are not aberrations. This is all how the game of life works. So, if it were a choice between Christianity and Satanism, Satanism wins. Now, folks, you who are uninitiated, who are watching this video, may be feeling horrified by what I'm saying. Understand that I mean this mythically. There is no Satan. Okay, and I know some of you are not used to thinking in these abstract kind of ways. But I don't want to I can't dumb everything down just for every single video that I make. So let's move on. Satan versus Buddha. In Buddhism, you get certain trends towards asceticism, towards going off sex, going off possessions, going off alcohol. This ascetic tradition, you get it in Christianity as well, but as if we're going to get serious now. We're going to get serious about meditating and reaching nirvana or whatever it is. This is a major wrong turn, but I don't think all Buddhists think that way. And certainly, Satanism is a perfect antidote to that kind of thinking. Because in Satanism, it's understood that life happens here. Life is not a thing that you get elsewhere. And this idea in Buddhism of dissolving the ego, of reaching nirvana through dissolving of the ego, it's a failure to understand that the thing called nirvana is happening all around you. It's right here. This is it. The non-dual state that Buddhists are seeking is this. Non-duality is not separate from duality. There is nothing to get to except right here. And I feel like I'm probably not finding the words to express this, but when I realized this was a profound realization to me, that life is not a thing happening in some other dimension that I have to reach, in the way that Christians think of heaven. Life is right here. And any form of living forever is more to be understood as the next generation, not this one. If you look at what human beings do, they mate and they pop out another human being, and that human mates and they pop out another human being, and on it goes. That's the afterlife. It's happening right here. It's the people who come after us, who are also us. If we lose our attachment to the idea that the ego is an entity sitting inside your head, there's nothing but a lens in there. A lens that experiences the universe from a certain point of view. So you don't even need concepts like reincarnation that you see in some forms of Buddhism, I think. I mean, my favourite Buddhist authors would be Brad Warner and Alan Watts, and they're my two real sources for reading about Buddhism. I haven't read like Shobo Genzo by Dogen or any of the ancient texts. But these two guys, they're largely, in sync with the way I'm thinking. So, the big problem for me with Satanism is that it believes in the self. It believes in the existence of the self as an entity. And Buddhism for me is the antidote to that. But on the flip side, Satanism continues to be relevant because even though there is no actual self, you will still continue to have body-mind awareness. You'll just understand that in this awareness, there isn't actually a self in there. So because it continues to be life against a hostile world sometimes, moving around with a sensitive body that can feel pain, that can die, that can inflict pain. Most of what is said in Satanism, and even some of what is said in Christianity, it applies. It still applies, even though there is no self. So the most interesting thing for me is how the two ideologies of Satanism and Buddhism, how they can be integrated into a philosophy that makes sense. So that's why I don't really call myself a Buddhist. I don't really call myself a Satanist. The Church of Satan has always tried to have squatters' rights over the term Satanist, and they don't like other people using it. And I have to say that I don't agree with Anton LaVey's rules and regulations in their entirety. I don't think they reflect a perfect understanding of humanity and how human beings should act, particularly on the matter of vengeance. I don't think that's a very good one to follow. And yet many of the things he said does make sense. So if you don't accept Anton LaVey in his entirety, you shouldn't call yourself a Satanist, according to the Church of Satan. But to me, like you said in your video, keep things a bit loose, keep things a bit changeable. Don't get too attached to your own narrative, I think was the way you put it. Satan continues to be a mythologically relevant character for me, and probably will continue to do so. And so will Buddha. Jesus, not so much. Take care, Mike. Thanks for your video.